Hi, good morning everyone, and welcome to lesson 1 of your transition unit on witch hunts in early modern Europe. I'm your teacher, I suppose, for this section to lesson. My name is Mr. Dickens, and I'm the lead history consultant at the Harris Federation. And a couple of weeks ago, I was asked to put together a unit of work that would help bridge the gap between you as Year 11 students and you as A-level students who will be starting Year 12 history somewhere in the Harris Federation in September. I chose the witch hunts or witchcraft as a topic because I think it's incredibly engaging, and it also allows you to think about and practice some of the skills that are going to be really important when you start your A-levels, such as writing about causation, but also engaging with some really interesting and challenging primary sources, and also thinking about and evaluating historical interpretations about a particular topic. It's also a topic with lots of links to other subjects that you might also be studying as part of your your A-level course. So there's lots of links to artwork, you can see in the background of the title slide. There's lots of links to literature. And there's also some really interesting links to sociology and psychology as well, which many of you might be studying as well. So this first lecture is just a bit of an introduction. The way this is going to work is I'll upload week by week a PowerPoint lecture, which hopefully will give you some of the core knowledge that you're going to need for that week's work. There'll be an option where you can see the PowerPoint and listen to me at the same time. If you don't want to do that, there'll also be an option where you can just go through the PowerPoint without having to listen to any audio. There'll be some lecture notes, and then there'll be some activities for you to work on each week as well. So this is some background, kind of Witchcraft 101. What do we mean when we're talking about witchcraft? What do we mean when we're talking about the witch hunts? And what is this project going to look like for you over the next 10 to 12 weeks? So welcome to the course. First of all, just a couple of aims. Expand your historical knowledge by studying a new topic in depth. It's something that hopefully you will have a degree of contextual knowledge on from your GCSE Paper 1 mathematic unit. If you did the crime and punishment element, you would have looked at the witch hunts in England a bit as part of that. But whatever topic that you studied, whether you did crime or medicine, you would have learned about the Reformation, you would have learned about the Renaissance period, and you'll have an idea about the context that we're talking about, which really is the period in the late 16th and early 17th century. The second aim, and this is really important, is to build the key historical skills that are important at A-level. Note-taking and independent work and wider reading is something that the best of you would have done at GCSE, but it's something that's really important at A-level, and you really do have to love history to get the most out of it at advanced level. Analysing sources and evaluating interpretations, historical skills that are very important at Key Stage 5, and also essay writing. There's no getting away from this. History is a written subject, and your ability to write well-informed, persuasive, well-crafted, interesting essays is going to be really key. And again, it's looking forward even beyond Year 12 and Year 13. Developing independent study skills is something that whatever you're studying, whatever you want to go on to after A-levels, is something that's going to be really, really important. And we'll practice developing and then refining some of those skills as we go through the course. So, split into 2 units. The first key topic, which will take us up to half term, roughly, it is on causation. Why did the witch hunt take place? So we'll look at religious foundations and the Reformation, intellectual attitudes. What did the elites in society, the kings, princes, bishops, the powerful, influential people believe about witch hunting, and what was their role in driving these witch hunts? What legal changes were taking place, and then some additional factors. There's lots of different strands and important elements that combine to make something as long-lasting and significant as the witch hunts take place. And then we'll look at some skills. We'll look at explaining causation, and we'll also look at evaluating interpretations. There's the skills element of this. Key topic 2, which we'll move on to after half term, is why or was witch hunting woman hunting. So we'll look at the motivations that drove why certain people in early modern Europe were persecuted and prosecuted and executed for being witches. And gender is a big part of that argument. So we'll look at female victims, we'll also look at male witches, we'll look at children that were accused of witchcraft, we'll look at why certain people were targeted in certain parts of Europe, and then we'll refine some of our work on evaluating interpretations so that you can start year 12 really quite confident if you're given a piece of history, you've got the knowledge, and to understand it, you can really engage critically with what people have written about the topic that you're studying, which is vital for you as historians. So a bit of context here. I'll kind of give you a second to read through this. I want to avoid the trap of just reading out lots and lots of PowerPoint slides for you, although I'll probably get something to do now as we go through some of these lectures. In terms of chronology, the period that we're really looking at, the broader period of the witch hunt, roughly between 1450 and 1750, the most intense period of witch hunting, slightly narrower than that, and we're looking late 16th to early 17th century, so between about 1580 perhaps to the 1650s, the first part of that 17th century. Because by 1750, in most areas, the witch hunts are dying down, or have actually died out. The late 16th, 17th centuries, we're looking at a dramatic increase in witchcraft trials. Slightly surprising, as the number of witchcraft trials had started to decline before that period. So as historians, when we start to look at causation, we're really going to have to think, well, what was happening at that time? What change took place to create this sudden spike, this sudden increase in the number of people being prosecuted and put on trial for being witches? If that doesn't follow the general trend of history, that's something that we're going to have to look at, and that hopefully we'll be able to answer by the end of this first unit. A bit of stuff on key terms as well. When we're talking about witch hunts, we're not talking about, in most cases, a hue and cry being raised and villagers gathering up their pitchforks and chasing down somebody who they've seen attempting to use magic to harm someone, or they've seen flying around the village on a broomstick wearing a pointed hat. It's not that kind of active, police going out and dragging people out of their homes and going arresting them. So we shouldn't confuse it with terms like manhunt that we might be seeing, in the news or something today. Instead of that, witch hunting involved identifying individuals who were widely believed to be engaged in a dangerous and secret activity, which was witchcraft. Why were they believed to be engaged in that activity? Well, it wasn't because they were seen attempting to use witchcraft. In almost all cases, they were believed to be engaged in activity more to do with the fact that they were viewed with suspicion in their village or in their community. They were outsiders, or just over the years, their behaviour and their conduct had given them a reputation as a difficult person or potentially dangerous person. And that's why in a lot of cases they were seen that. But we'll look more at that in detail when we come to look at victims and how people were selected. Witches were hunted, therefore, in much the same way that members of an underground or terrorist movement might be hunted today. The authorities found it very difficult often to know who was a witch and who wasn't a witch. The very nature of the crime of witchcraft was secretive. People didn't do it in public. The only people that would know who was a witch were other witches, who for obvious reasons wouldn't publicise that knowledge. So it became very challenging for the authorities, once they decided that the crime of witchcraft was so important, to actually find out who was involved in this activity. And when we come to look at legal changes in one of the next couple of lessons, how the authorities and how the judicial went about identifying and prosecuting witches, it's going to be a very interesting, perhaps even quite frightening topic. But in general, and this is the last line on this slide here, in general, acting on the basis of accusations, denunciations, basically grassing somebody up, or sometimes mere rumours, the authorities arrested those suspected of witchcraft, interrogated them, and did everything in their power to extract a confession out of them. because there was very little physical evidence of the crime of witchcraft, because there was a complete lack in almost every case of an eyewitness to the crime of witchcraft, confessions become very, very important. It's the main source of evidence for convicting someone of this crime, and the interrogation process was obviously crucial to that. But that's a little bit of background. But the meaning of witchcraft is very important, because witchcraft is something that even today has such a large influence in popular culture through film and television and books. We often starting an inquiry into the topic of witchcraft with quite a lot of misconceptions or stereotypes about what we mean by witchcraft. But people in the time period that we're studying had a very specific notion of what a witch was, which is very different to our idea. So when people in the early modern period referred to the term witchcraft, they were almost always referring to two types of activity. One, a witch was somebody who practiced or used magic to cause harm. The type of harm they could cause varied in severity. It could be causing physical harm. It could be causing sickness or unexplained illness. It could be creating bad weather that would destroy crops. And obviously in an early modern society, that was devastating. That was your food supply gone. That would lead to famine and pestilence and all kinds of other hardships. It could be other things. It could be preventing couples from being able to have children. Any unexplained illness or malady or something that made that person's life difficult could be attributed to witches. And often when they were deciding who was responsible for that, they'd look for the outsider in the village, the difficult person in the village, and that would be kind of how this reputation would start to build up over time. And this idea, or this definition of a witch as somebody who practiced harmful magic, was really what the lower classes in the early modern society thought of when they thought of witchcraft. The peasant classes, if they were asked to describe what a witch was, they would usually think of a witch as somebody who performed harmful acts using magic. So that's one element of this. The second element, and this is something that the more educated members of early modern society subscribed to, was a witch was somebody who made a pact and worshipped and did the work of the devil, Satan, the Christian antithesis of God, the source of all evil on earth. And this is a new development, and this is something that might perhaps help explain why prosecution for witchcraft increased at the time that they did. So for the elites in society, judges, lawmakers, educated men at university, bishops, high-ranking members in the church, a witch was also a person who not only performed harmful magic, but who also chose to make a pact with the devil and paid some form of homage to him. The images you have on your right come from a witch hunting manual created by somebody who went around and prosecuted and hunted witches, and he illustrates this pact here of people queuing up to pay homage to Satan there in the bottom image, and in the top image, a part of this pact that comes up quite often in the source material was they had to sort of finalise their pact by kissing the devil on his rear end, and you can see people kind of queuing up to pay homage to him in that way, which is something that medieval or early modern lawmakers seem quite interested in. At this time, the devil was considered to be the enemy of the Christian God and the personification of all evil. He was also believed to be an active presence in the world. The devil was somebody who was actively afoot in Christian society and was proactively corrupting men and women, turning them over to his side and setting them off to do his work on earth. So this second definition of witchcraft, of someone who worships the devil, it does have a close link to the first definition, because it was believed the devil is the source of the witch's magical power. And you see this lots and lots of times in confessions from people convicted of witchcraft. they will describe how Satan recruited them, what he gave them, for them to sell their soul to him, how they showed their loyalty to him. And then very often there'll be a section where they describe the devil giving them some kind of magic powder or magic potion, and their instructions to go out into the world and cause harm. So these two definitions, this is what people at the time thought of when they thought of witchcraft. Somebody who could use magic to cause harm, but it was someone who was engaged in a much more serious sacrilegious crime of that, which was this pact with the devil. And that pact with the devil turned witchcraft from a crime carried out by an individual, which was how peasants thought of witchcraft, into a crime that was part of a much larger, much more dangerous conspiracy to do the devil's work and to undermine Christian society and that's what made it so terrible and so frightening for people in London at the time. The emergence of this belief that witches were not only magicians but also devil worshippers changed the nature of the crime of witchcraft. So this is why it was so frightening and so serious. Witches were now not simply criminals, similar to murderers or thieves, but they were heretics, and witchcraft is an extreme form of heresy. It's the most extreme form of turning your back on God and the accepted religion of the area that you live in, because you're not only not practicing a religion, you're not only not believing in it, you are actively doing the work of God's enemy, which is why witches were hated so much and feared so much because of this pact they made with, this supposed pact they made with the devil. What made the threat from witches even more terrifying was the belief that it was not a matter of one individual turning their back on Christ. It was a collective crime. Witches were part of a secret organisation that met regularly with Satan at gatherings called Sabbaths. And these witches' gatherings, these Sabbaths, are also something that are described in huge amounts of detail by demonologists, by witch hunters, and by confessing witches. And the image that you saw in the first slide of this presentation is an artist's impression of what these Sabbaths look like, and the type of things that took place at these Sabbaths. And you'll read some primary accounts, some primary descriptions of people from the early modern period describing all the goings on in all their gory detail later on in the course as well. But they're very fascinating documents. Mainly because they're completely made up. There's no evidence that any of these meetings ever took place. So they are, in a sense, a working imagination that was incredibly important. Okay, witches therefore were the embodiment of all that was evil in Christian society. They turned their back on God and made a pact with the devil, and used magic to kill and cause all types of harm, and destroying crops and causing famine, turning husbands against their wives. They attended Sabbaths with other witches, where all manner of satanic and sacrilegious activities were carried out. That's why they were so bad. That's what witches did. What made them so threatening is because they did so in secret, and so they were difficult to identify. You never quite knew in your village whether the person next to you could be a witch, or the person you trusted for years was part of this secret conspiratorial activity, which again heightens the fear that people felt towards witches, because anyone potentially could be part of this organisation. The reality was very different. The book you have on the right hand side, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, was written by a historian called Margaret Murray at the start of the 20th century. She basically claimed the big idea behind this book was that there were groups of women who met and worshipped a pre-Christian pagan god who looked something like the kind of horned goat figure that you see in the front cover of that book. The unfortunate thing for these women was that this god resembled the Christian devil, and therefore they were confused with devil worshippers, and this harmless religion that worshipped nature and very, very peaceful were hunted down. And this idea was quite popular for quite a while. By the mid 20th century, it had been comprehensively proven to be false, that no such religion or gatherings took place, and that people weren't hunted as witches because they were part of an organisation that was just confused with devil worshippers. It's very hard to tell how many people in the early modern period attempted to use magic. People certainly believed in magic, and there certainly were people that did attempt to use magic to get back at an enemy, or equally to heal someone. In an age where medicine and medical understanding of disease was very poor, people did attempt to use potions and magic and spells to heal people on occasions. But the percentage of people executed for witchcraft on the basis that they practiced harmful magic was very low. Again, it's not, the witch hunts are not an attempt to round up and execute people who identified as magicians or white witches, or people that could use magic for good or bad. It's not, that's not the dynamic that drives 100,000 people roughly, to the pyres and to the stakes to get burned and to get executed for this crime. Some women, perhaps some vulnerable women, did attempt to use magic as a way of protecting themselves, or proactively went out and cultivated a reputation as a witch in their village or in their community in order to avoid mistreatment from other villagers, or to increase their social status. Somebody who had a reputation of being able to use magic for good might have an elevated status in the village or in their community. So-called kind of wise women were people who could use white magic to help people. But equally, if you're vulnerable, if you feel you're under threat, letting it be known, or putting forth the view that you could, if pushed, use magic to cause harm to protect yourself, was something that occasionally some people chose to do. But the majority of accused witches, and this is a really important point to take away, did not practice any sort of magic at all, but were either accused of causing harm by magical means when unexplained misfortune struck one of their neighbours, or when they were named as an accomplice of other witches in a large-scale witch hunt. So it's not people who identify as witches or who deliberately practice magic who are hunted down. It's people that are accused of using magic to cause harm, and why they're accused is something that we need to look at in detail when we come to look at who were the victims of this witch hunt. The only real evidence, so going back to this case put forward by Margaret Murray, the only real evidence we have for the existence of a group of people who collectively worship the devil is the confessions which were recorded during witch trials. This is where the support for this idea of there being a large-scale conspiratorial group of witches who met at Sabbaths to do the devil's work. The only evidence we have for that are the confessions of people found guilty of witchcraft. Now, if you were a judge or if you were a witch hunter, these confessions validated your view that this was true. It validated your view that these activities were taking place, that they were going on. If you were a peasant, they also helped persuade you that these events were taking place, that this person was a witch, because these confessions would be read publicly at the witch's execution. So it helped these kind of elite ideas about witchcraft filter down to the peasant population because they were read out publicly. These are very problematic forms of evidence for several reasons, however. Number one, and most obvious, people, after being interrogated, confessed to crimes that they physically could not possibly have done, such as flying, sometimes flying tens of miles to attend one of these witches' Sabbaths. So we know they're confessing to things that they couldn't possibly have done. Never once, or very rarely, almost never, did a witch's neighbour testify under oath that they had witnessed an accused witch worshipping the devil or making a pact with him. It's, to my knowledge, unheard of that somebody put their hand on a Bible and said, I swear to God that I saw this person making a pact with him. Because, religion was so important then, and, swearing on a Bible falsely was something that was very serious. And obviously people never saw anyone else making a pact with the devil because, it didn't happen, it doesn't exist. No one was ever caught red-handed worshipping the devil, in groups or otherwise. This in contrast to other secret or conspiratorial groups, which the authorities were quite good at breaking up. The authorities were able to break up political subversives or people planning political violence or other dangerous, conspiratorial groups. They never broke up a coven of witches or devil worshippers. The confessions given by convicted witches sometimes are, or very often are, incredibly detailed and go into incredible detail in describing things, like the images you can see on the right hand side, flying from place to place, detailed descriptions of what the devil looked like, what he did, and detailed descriptions of what happened at these Sabbaths. They are more often than not the result of the use of torture and leading questions by the interrogator. What I mean by leading questions is interrogators saying things like, did the devil ask you to trample on the holy bread used in church communions? And the accused witch would say yes, because they picked up on the fact that was the answer that the interrogator wanted them to give, and if they gave that answer, they might be released from torture or would suffer slightly less. And interrogators would use leading questions like this in order to build up a really detailed confession of the supposed crimes that have been committed. But then they're not reliable, they're not reliable evidence because of the use of torture. Therefore, there's no credible evidence that those people who were convicted for witchcraft were part of an actual or real society of devil worshippers. And there's nothing that should persuade us that such an organisation ever existed in the early modern period. The size of the hunts is quite difficult to estimate. You might have seen, it's quite an old film now, you might have seen or read the Da Vinci Code, where there's a scene in the film where a figure of something like 20 million people, 10 million people were executed as witches during the period of time. Figures like this are far too high. They're based on the claims of witch hunters who were exaggerating the figures, either to make themselves stand out as the best witch hunter, boost their own reputations in this field, or to exaggerate the extent of witchcraft to kind of convince people that this was such a serious, dangerous, damaging crime. It's hard to tell. Records have been lost or damaged or don't exist. Most credible historians probably put the figure at around 100,000 people put on trial for witchcraft. Overall, on average, across Europe, the rate of execution, so people who were put on trial and subsequently executed, is about 70%. Again, these are estimates, but these are the most credible estimates that we have. Around half of those trials were in the German-speaking lands within the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Empire, I've put it up on a map here on the right-hand side for you. If you know your European geography, you'll see that it's very similar to modern Germany. But Germany back then wasn't one unified country. It was a collection of lots of different states with different rulers and different, in some cases, different religions, but with a degree of independence. Germany wasn't a unified country, although there were some linguistic, cultural elements that did tie them together. And there was no equivalent for the Holy Roman Empire. But this is the kind of epicenter, I suppose, for the witch hunts. This German-speaking lands within the Holy Roman Empire. The grim reality, and you might be sat there thinking, well, 70,000 people isn't that much. You might have studied other persecutions by Mao or by Stalin or by Hitler and think, well, actually, these are quite low figures. And in comparison they are, but these statistics shouldn't really hide from us the grim reality that they represent tens of thousands of peoples who were executed for crimes they didn't commit, almost always after suffering horrific torture at the hands of the legal system. The statistics also don't include a large number of people who were unofficially accused of being a witch by their neighbours, were not brought to trial, but who live lives of daily persecution and social isolation as a result of this reputation that they developed, which is also a horrific situation for those people. And because this figure covers a period of over 3 centuries, it doesn't give a sense of the terrifying intensity of individual witch hunts, which very often took place over a very short space of time. I've put 2 examples here underneath. 274 people executed for witchcraft in Eichstätt in just 1 year. Very, very intense example of witch hunting. Terrifying for people that lived in this community. It wasn't a particularly large community. 274 people is a big proportion of the people living in that area. Especially it's people that you would have known, you potentially would have grown up with, being executed for this terrible, terrifying crime. 130 witches executed in just 1 day in Quedlinburg in 1589. Imagine being at that place at that time where 130 people were put to death for this crime. They're absolutely terrifying. It's worth remembering with all of this as well that for the authorities, the main statistical concern wasn't how many witches had been executed, but because of the nature of the crime of witchcraft, how many were still at loose, at large, doing the work of the devil. And that was the real fear. It wasn't they were executing too many people. It was, what are we doing about the witches that we still don't know about? How we find them now? Which again, added to the sense of fear in Europe. And again, I suppose we'll build on this. These estimates for the number of witches that were potentially active in Europe were huge. And it's important that we understand this because it gives us an indication of why the authorities viewed witchcraft as such a serious problem. 1571, the King of France, Charles IX, was told that there were 300,000 witches in his kingdom alone. The demonologist Henry Boget, who we look at in quite a bit of detail in this course, I've got a little extract from him on the right hand side, used this figure to estimate a total of 1.8 million witches for all of Europe. The numbers of people estimated to be attending these witches' Sabbaths, these gatherings, range from perhaps 500 or a few hundred at a time to as many as 100,000 witches congregating in one place with the devil to carry out all these blasphemous, sacrilegious acts. And it's these figures, really more than the number of people that were executed, that help to explain why the educated classes, the kings, the high-ranking officials in the church were so frightened of witchcraft. They help to explain why they prosecuted witches with such ferocity. A threat this size could not be ignored. They had to do something about this society of witches, which was aiming to destroy Christian civilization. It also meant, and this is very important, that ordinary legal restraints and conventions could be relaxed or in many cases ignored altogether. Legal restraints on when torture could be applied and the types of torture and for how long could be set aside or were set aside often in cases of witchcraft. The standards of evidence and proof needed before torture could be carried out were often severely relaxed or disregarded. Rumour and a single accusation given in secret could be enough to received with torture in witchcraft cases. And they help to explain, and you might hear this term popping up in some of the works of historians or some of the primary sources that you'll see as part of this course. All of these things help to explain why witchcraft was seen as a crimen exceptum. It's a Latin phrase that just means an exceptional crime, a crime that is different to other crimes, is more dangerous, is more significant, is more severe, and therefore needs to be dealt with differently. And you can hear Boget's view of this. This is from a text that he wrote in 1602 called Discourse on Witchcraft. And this really kind of sets up the course and gives you an idea about what we're talking about. Witchcraft is a crime apart, both on account of its enormity and because it is usually committed at night and always secretly. Therefore, the usual legalities and ordinary procedures, legal procedures, cannot be strictly observed, cannot be followed. We prosecute witches differently to how we prosecute other criminals. One accused of witchcraft must never be unconditionally released, whatever torture he may have suffered, if there remains the slightest indication against him. But as we have seen, he who has but once given himself to the devil cannot easily be withdrawn from his clutches. And that staining of your character that an accusation of witchcraft gave you was almost impossible to shake off, which again gives you a sense that even if you were able to survive the interrogation process, an association with witchcraft, with this crime, was so damaging it would stick for the rest of your life and lead to all kinds of other difficulties and problems with you. So that's the introduction to the course. Hopefully that's generated some questions that you might have. If you go into this file again, there are some activities for you to complete this week. There is a podcast to listen to. There is an online lecture to watch on YouTube from an American university. And there is a short bit of background reading on the historical context of all of this, which is the Reformation, and an activity to help you practice taking notes from bits of secondary literature. So take your time, listen to the podcast, answer the questions, the comprehension questions based on that. There's only 4 or 5, I think. I've tried to keep it quite simple. Watch the lecture, take the notes, and then I'll upload the second lesson on causes, why this witch hunt took place, for you as soon as possible. So I hope you enjoyed the first lecture. Thank you very much. And yeah, we'll catch up in the next lesson.